Sega, known for consistently ruining their own franchises, having fantastic soundtracks, and refusing to re-release Dynamite co-op on modern consoles. If there's any company that has time and time again attempted to preserve their classic games, then it's them. Whilst their Sonic collections are pretty well known, the one that I personally find the most interesting is the Sega Ages series. There were 4 iterations of the Sega Ages line, being the original Sega Saturn one, the 2500 one on PS2, the online one on PS3 and Xbox 360, and lastly the one simply called Sega Ages on Switch. All of them attempt to make classic Sega games easily available and usually contain a few new features or quality of life improvements that in some cases make them the definitive versions of these games. The 2500 line is a bit special in that regard, as they didn't just try to improve these games but straight up remade them, for better and for worse. The line was a collaborative effort between D3 Publisher, the creators of the Simple series of low-budget games sold at a cheap price, and Sega, in an attempt to make cheap and affordable modern versions of some beloved Sega properties. This led to the founding of Sega's 3D Ages subsidiary, created specifically for the purpose of making these remakes. There ended up being a total of 33 games released by them, though not all of them were remakes, as some of them were simple collections of several older games with some quality of life improvements here and there, or straight up ports. As this video will only be focusing on the remakes, I may as well just run through all the ports and collections in order of release. The collections are volumes 15, 20, 21, 25, 28, 29, 30, 32 and 33, whilst the ports are volumes 12, 16, 19 and 24. I will also not be covering volumes 1, 11, 17 and 32, as I already did so on the Classic Phantasy Star retrospective and the PS2 manga games videos respectively. Links in the description. And with all of the formalities out of the way, I can finally start talking about the games themselves. First up is Volume 2, Monaco GP. The original game was very simple. All you have to do is avoid cars and other stuff in the way. Can speed up and slow down, but that's about it really. If that's what you're looking for, then the classic arcade mode is exactly that, but instead of sprites you have 3D models. Original arcade mode is where things get interesting though. Instead of a straight line, you have a series of courses and your goal is to finish 2 laps before the time runs out. You can jump now, but in exchange you're no longer able to manually speed up. Instead you have to collect these star thingies. The more you get, the faster you go. You can also use the shoulder buttons for quick turns since corners now exist, and on top of that there are also items which make avoiding enemies easier, though there are also downgrades and you can get them at random by picking up these boxes. The Grand Prix, Time Attack and Versus modes are essentially the same as original arcade, however with their own small quirks. In Grand Prix you have to play an entire set of courses at once. In Time Attack the obstacles and items are removed, and in Versus the only obstacle is the other players. All around I'd say we're off to a great start. I honestly vastly prefer this version of the game over the original. It's basically a completely different game, but it's fun and I like it. Do you think God leaves humanity alone because he's appalled by the atrocious crimes we commit? This is essentially just Fantasy Zone, but really fucking ugly. None of these games are in any way pretty, mind you, but this one's up there when it comes to being the ugliest. The main difference is the addition of an arranged mode. Wanna know what it changes? Every time you kill a boss, you get a shitty Space Harrier style minigame where you collect coins, that's it. But since we're already on the subject of Space Harrier, let's talk about that one too. It's essentially the exact same game as the original, but again, way uglier. Unlike Fantasy Zone though, they didn't add some new minigame or something, so yeah, it's essentially just a worse version of the game. They did however add this announcer guy, and some of his lines are absolutely hilarious.
You got an attitude. Harrier, release yourself now. Cool, Harrier. You can beat them all. Get busy, Harrier. Dragonland is screaming.
Alright, I take back everything I said about Fantasy Zone being ugly. This easily takes the cake as the ugliest game in this lineup. Not only that, but it's flat out shit. The character models look terrible. Especially Gillian, the dude looks like he's inside his fucking midlife crisis. The game is really stiff and unresponsive and none of the characters feel in any way good to play. This is just an objectively inferior version of the game and I cannot recommend anyone to play it. Volumes 6 and 7 on the other hand are essentially just one-to-one recreations of the original. Nothing particularly interesting about them. They just had a facelift and no more. Bonanza Bros is still Bonanza Bros, and Tant-R is still Tant-R. And Columns is still fucking boring. The only way to make me actively play it is with a Sakura War storyline attached to it, and even that took a lot of energy to beat. Virtua Racing is the first of these games I would consider an enhanced port instead of a remake, as the only things it adds are 3 new courses and 4 new cars. And I still suck at it, but I also dislike Game Ground, and I dislike this version of the game even more. But just like with Volume 6 and 7, this is essentially just a one-to-one recreation from what I can tell. And yeah, I still hate the game. It's time for me to come clean about something. I've never played an Afterburner game before. I think this version may be good, but I legitimately have no idea what I'm doing, and I keep dying pretty much immediately. The only real difference that I can tell from the original is this new arranged mode that lets you play as different jets, but it wouldn't shock me if the original version is better. I think it's pretty much universally agreed upon that everyone likes OutRun. It's a simple and fun game, and this version definitely does it justice, I'd say. Though I do feel like they made it way easier. I may just be imagining things, but I swear the original gave me way more trouble. The arcade mode is essentially just a one-to-one recreation of the original, whilst the arranged mode adds a bonus objective of having to outpace your rival racers. And hey, would you look at that, the entire soundtrack is there, both in the original form and as rearrangements. This is great because I've seen a lot of people complain about the remixed soundtracks in some of these remakes. Alien Syndrome, much like Golden Axe, is another massive downgrade from the original. It's far slower paced and the enemies take forever to kill. It turns the entire game into a slog and it's just not fun. They also change around the order of some stages and bosses, which, while weird, doesn't really change a lot. If nothing else, it's at least better than the Wii reboot, but honestly that should be a requirement for every version of the original Alien Syndrome. And then you have Dragon Force, which is still the same good old game as the Saturn original, but with new sprites, portraits and artworks, and if those bother you can still just turn them off and replace them with the originals instead. So I'd say this is a pretty good version of the game. It's also one of the most popular games on the Saturn and it earns that spot as it's pretty damn good, so I would recommend it. And while I'm here, I may as well mention Volume 22, Advanced Daisen Ryaku, Deutsch Dengeki Sakusen. This is the only game out of all of them that I simply wasn't able to play no matter what I did. I just couldn't get it to run, be it on a PS2, a PS3 or even an emulator. It just wouldn't boot up, instead just getting stuck on a black screen. Which unfortunately means that there will be no Nazi warfare in this video. The Memorial Collection is cool because it's actually 5 remakes in one, with the original unaltered version also included. Except that they're not really remakes. Well, 2 of them are, but the others are basically nothing like the originals. Let's start from the top, head on. The original is very simple. You play this blue car and have to try to avoid getting into a crash with the red car whilst collecting as many dots as possible. The remake, on the other hand, has this weird nonsensical cyberspace aesthetic, and instead of a car you're some weird blue sphere thingy trying to avoid crashing into a red one. The level layout is also completely different and the AI is 20 times dumber. Frankly, this is more comparable to Pac-Man than the original game, simply due to the fact that it's now stage-based, and getting every dot in a stage leads you to the next one. Borderline. In the original, you have to try to maneuver this tank as far as possible and shoot down enemies along the way. The remake, on the other hand, is a stage-based twin-stick shooter. And a pretty fun one at that, I might add. You have 3 weapons, a regular shot, a flamethrower, and a laser, with the latter 2 having to cool down after a bit of use. The objective of each stage is to destroy all of these big balls hidden within the level, and I definitely say it's much more fun than the original. The best way I can describe Congo Bongo is by calling it an isometric Donkey Kong, in the sense that you have to reach this big gorilla at the end of a short stage, who periodically throws obstacles at you while you try to jump over gaps and avoid enemies. The stages vary quite a bit from one another, but the end goal is always the same. So the remake is completely different for absolutely no reason. The big gorilla dude is entirely gone and instead you have to collect a set amount of treasure per stage and then reach the exit. It would be simple, but it plays like shit. The jump feels incredibly stiff and unresponsive and the hit detection on enemies is utter bullshit. I can't count the amount of times where I got genuinely upset about dying despite the enemy in no way having touched me. Pengu was essentially left entirely unchanged, except that the penguin is now 20 times cuter. God bless him. And then there's Tranquilizer Gun. Like Pengu, the game was left pretty much unchanged, barring obvious enhancements, and they turned this weird stick person into a cute lady. This is technically the second game on this list, but I wanted to talk about it as the last one because the original was also featured in Dynamite Co-op, aka Dynamite Deka 2, which perfectly segues into the next game. Dynamite Deka fucking rocks. This is an excellent remake of a fantastic game. Not only is the original included and just as good as it has always been, but the remade visuals actually look pretty good for a change. They also didn't touch the gameplay at all whatsoever, so it remains an excellent time. On top of that, they added an easy mode, a mode where a single gunshot insta-kills both you and the enemies, a mode where you can only arrest enemies by picking up a gun and grabbing them from behind and no other way of killing them works, a mode where you have to beat every single encounter in a strict time limit, and a mode styled after Altered Beast where you are a werewolf and gradually lose health and enemies drop pickups you need to continuously pick up so you don't die. I would honestly go as far as to say that this is hands down the best version of the game there is, and anyone who likes beat-em-ups should definitely check this out. Panzer Dragoon, on the other hand, is another one of those cases I'd consider an enhanced port rather than a remake. Much like Dynamite Deka, the original Saturn game is included, but so is Arranged mode, which does look a bit better considering it has cleaner models, but the visual improvements are completely negligible, to be honest. Arranged does, however, have unlockable extras like a level select and a gallery full of artworks, which is, cool. But what seriously cripples this version of the game is that it's locked to 20 FPS, which can get incredibly frustrating. At least they didn't touch the godly soundtrack. And last but definitely not least, we have Cyber Troopers Virtual On. This is yet another enhanced port that boasts a better frame rate with up to 60 FPS being supported, widescreen, a 480p resolution, online play, and an assault mode that disables all ranged weapons. However, there's also a cheapy mode that doesn't really do anything except look funny, dash cancelling, a mechanic from later games in the series, and a special mode that lets you play as the arcade mode's final boss. The bonus stuff may not be all that grand, but if you ask me, the 60 FPS and widescreen alone make this the best version of the game out there. And with that, we're done. All the remakes and enhanced ports in the Sega Ages 2500 series. These games are definitely not perfect, but I enjoyed my time with them and I can appreciate their existence. If nothing else, these games are, to some extent, pretty interesting. And with all of that said, do me a favor here. Have a great day. Cheers.